Truth is stranger than fiction, but it is because fiction is obliged to stick to possibilities. Truth isn't. As enthusiasts of the paranormal, we realize that Mark Twain's quote is just as true today as it was when he wrote it in 1897. And while the topic of today's show can't necessarily be verified as fact, we can say that the eyewitnesses wholeheartedly believe that what they experienced is real. So as we start tonight's episode, I leave it up to you to find the separation between fact and fantasy. From the fictional storyline of a 1980s movie to the real-life streets, backyards, and forests of our hometowns, today's show covers a lesser-known entity that is literally cloaked in mystery, an entity that some call the Glimmerman.
The first time it happened, I was sleeping and woke up because I felt a hand on my leg and I realized that I couldn't move.
And he come across this object on the ground which was the shape of a flying saucer. So he jumped out of his pickup and went down there, and there was 4 beings laying on the ground.
When I raised my head back up, I was turning my head, and out of my peripheral vision I seen something hop to a tree. And it was tall, about 7-8 foot tall, and it was black, real hairy, like a gorilla.
Welcome to the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, and thank you for being here. I am your host, Nick Ryan. I'd like to start the show by saying thank you to our listeners, and of course our supporters on Patreon. I'd also like to welcome our newest patrons, Pam, Christina, and Seth. Your support and generosity makes the podcast possible. The year was 1987, and the blockbuster movie Predator was thrilling audiences across the nation. Taking place in the jungle of Central America, the film's main villain was a technologically advanced alien who possessed the ability to blend into its environment by way of a cloaking device, which would render it almost completely transparent or translucent. While most of us are familiar with the movie, you might be surprised to learn that years before the sci-fi film was even conceived, people were having unsettling encounters with curious, camouflaged entities, and the bewildering sightings continue to this day. But how is this possible? How can something that seems to be pure fiction have a foothold in reality? To be honest, I haven't the slightest idea, but the following articles and eyewitness accounts are intriguing to say the least, and I can't help but wonder just how little we actually know about the world around us. We'll start tonight's show with a man's encounter that took place in Nashville, Tennessee. The article comes from Mysterious Universe, and it says the following. On the October 26, 2014 episode of the popular paranormal radio show Coast to Coast AM, there was a breathless caller who called in with quite the amazing tale indeed. According to the caller, who identified himself as Greg from Dobson, North Carolina, he had had a rather remarkable encounter in 1993 or 94 with what can only be described as some sort of entity with an invisibility cloaking device while he was living in Nashville, Tennessee. He claimed that he had been out walking his dog one evening when he felt the distinct sense of eyes boring into him from beyond his perception, although no one else seemed to be there. He says this of what happened next. I started looking at some woods, down in the woods directly in front of me, and I couldn't see anything, but I could hear leaves rustling in the trees, so I started looking up towards the tops of the trees, and I had very good eyesight at the time. I didn't do drugs, I didn't drink. I saw something crouched down in the tops of the trees. The only way I could describe it, and I don't even know if the movie had come out yet, so I didn't know anything about it, but the movie Predator, where they saw that invisible creature. You could see the outline of everything, but you could see right through it, and it was sitting up in the very tops of the trees, where it wouldn't hold the weight of a man by any means, but this thing was as big as a man. I just stood there, looking at it, and I let go of the leash, and I yelled, "Hey!" And I took off at a dead run towards this thing, and it started running across the tops of the trees. It ran the length of a football field in no time. I mean, it was really fast. I don't know how it was running across the tops of the trees, but I know what I saw. After I thought about it, I thought, what in the world are you doing chasing this thing? I stopped, and it stopped, about the length of a football field away from where it started, and it turned around and looked at me again, and then it took off, out in the woods, and I didn't see it again. It scared the hell out of me, I know that, and I never ever told anybody about it, because I thought people would think I was a loon. Another report comes from an eyewitness on Reddit, who says she had her odd experience when she was around 5 years old, meeting something apparently not of this world, or at least the world as we know it, and even odder still, it would go on to be a reoccurring thing in her life. She says this about her first brush with this unearthly presence. When I was about 5 years old, I was playing by the edge of the woods behind my grandmother's house. I played there often, and my grandma just kept an eye on me from the kitchen or living room, because the house had a huge window that faced the woods. She would come out every once in a while just to see what I was up to. I was obsessed with digging in the dirt and collecting unusual rocks and arrowheads that littered the land where my grandmother lived. I should mention that this was in Midwest Illinois, not too far from Cahokia Mounds, so finding arrowheads was actually not that uncommon. Anyway, that day I remember picking out a spot to dig. I had been out there for a while, because I remember I had a pretty decent-sized hole going, when something caught my eye up in the tree that I was next to. I almost don't know how to explain it, but it looked like almost a heat wave coming off the branch of the tree. It was fall. I remember this because I had my pink jacket on, and remember thinking that my mom was going to be pissed because I got dirt around the bottom of the arms from digging. I also remember there being a lot of leaves on the ground. Anyway, I am staring at this heat wave and realize it has a human shape. So here I am, 5 years old, and wondering why there is an invisible man in the tree. I remember feeling scared but unsure what to do. Then it started moving and making a faint clicking sound. This is about the time that I decided that I was not supposed to be seeing this, and I hightailed it back to the house. My grandmother saw that I was pretty shaken, and I remember telling her that I had just seen an angel. In my 5-year-old mind, I didn't know what else it could be. I had never heard of aliens or ghosts or monsters, so to me, it had to be an angel, because that's all my little mind could think of. Fast forward to when I'm about 12 years old. By this time, the encounter was way out of my mind. I loved watching action and sci-fi movies. My dad rented a movie called Predator. I am watching it with him, and the first time you see the Predator, invisible and cloaked, I about crapped my pants. All the memories from that day digging in the dirt came flooding back. I even asked my dad if Predator was real, or if he knew of anyone or any animal that had a cloaking ability that I didn't know about. He told me that it was all fake. It wasn't like it is today where I could just Google it. I had no access to the internet. So again, I just put it out of my mind. Again, fast forward to the year 2004. I am grown. I have 3 small children. I just went through a separation from my husband. I moved to the next town over to an apartment with my kids. These apartments are all one-level duplexes, with there being 5 buildings. I am at the very last apartment of the last building. The apartments are considered in town, but are on the outskirts. There is a deep ditch that runs behind the buildings, with a chain-link fence that separates the backyard from the ditch. There are about 6 to 7 trees on our side of the fence. If you follow the ditch a little bit, you hit a small forest that eventually leads to the country, with a larger forest and farmland. I am a smoker, but would not smoke in the apartment because of the kids, so I often went out to the back porch. One night I was up late, doing laundry and stuff after the kids had gone to bed. I decided to take a smoke break before I myself went to sleep. I am back there on the porch, and I started hearing this faint clicking sound. I immediately looked out to the ditch, because I had seen a groundhog out there a few days before, and thought perhaps he was out there again. The yard is faintly lit from the outside light that is by the playground that is to the right of my back porch. I didn't turn on my porch light. I didn't normally, if I was just going out for a quick smoke. I didn't see any groundhog or movement from the ditch, so I go back to smoking my cigarette. The faint clicking sound keeps happening, and a slight shift of movement makes me look up into the tree to the left of my porch. It's there. The same invisible thing I had seen when I was 5. It is like a distortion, and in a human shape. It is crouched down on the branch, with an arm out holding onto the trunk of the tree. I couldn't believe it. I was like, is this happening? Has it come to kill me from seeing it all those years ago? All I could think about was my kids in the apartment sleeping. I ran in and slammed and locked the door. I ran to my kids' room and made sure that all the windows were locked. Then I just turned out all the lights in the living room and stared out the blinds at the tree to see if I could catch another glimpse of it. I sat there for a good 10 minutes and couldn't see anything. I began to think that I am just tired and my mind was playing tricks on me. Just as I was finally talking myself down, my neighbor's dog comes running across the yard and starts barking at the tree at the same branch that I had seen this predator thing. That pretty much freaked me out because this dog was not a barker. I actually have never heard him bark at anything, even at the groundhog that had been hanging out at the ditch. This barking went on for about a minute until I hear the neighbor lady who owns the dog call him back inside. The dog reluctantly turned to go back home, stopping every few feet to look back at the branch of the tree until he was out of my sight. I didn't sleep that night and have never seen anything like it again. I don't know what to think of it. I am a grown woman. I have kids and a good career. I just want to know if anyone else has had an experience like this. I know what I saw, believe it or not. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Also from Reddit is the story of a man in western Washington state who said he had been out on patrol looking for clandestine drug dealers in the area when he had his meeting with the very unusual. As he was working his way through the trees, his rifle held close considering the inherent dangers to what he was doing, something decidedly out of the ordinary happened to him. He would say this: "It began in late July when I was forced to make semi-regular patrols around the property on which I live, heavily wooded, very hilly, and wet with a creek and swamp at the bottom, when I was made aware of local drug addicts attempting incursions upon the property. As most of you likely know, drug addicts have a natural tendency towards violence, especially the breed we have in my neck of the woods. I began carrying a rifle as I made my patrols, because as the old adage puts it, better safe than sorry. Very quickly I found their tracks at the bottom of the hill, and I even managed to claim a gas can as a kind of war trophy. That led me to believe that they may be aiming to perform illegal logging on the property, which intensified my patrols. Soon after, I ran into a rather unsettling shape in the forest. I was on another patrol, standard routine procedure, when I passed an ancient cedar tree. I'd been past it 1.5 million times, but I suddenly felt as though I should take a seat underneath it and rest a while. As I sat down under the tree's boughs and set my rifle and day pack at my side, I sat in the silence and stillness for a while, taking in the sounds the woods have to offer. I almost felt as though I had entered the same state of zen I had the year previously, kneeling beside a natural spring after heavy rain. All was well. The world was fine and everything would be okay. I felt wonderful. I opened my eyes and rolled my head to my right to look out onto a grove of alder trees. Glancing upwards, I saw a humanoid shape. It was roughly 15 feet up in the air and had the distinct shape of a human head, neck, and shoulders, but no discernible bottom. It just seemed to fade away. The only way I can describe it is similar to the Predator films, in which the creature uses a cloaking device. I sat and stared at it for probably about 3 to 5 seconds before an overwhelming feeling of dread and anxiety overtook me. I should add that I'm very tough to genuinely scare. I've been through a great many nasty situations that don't bear mentioning, and suffice to say that this shook me to my very core. I was almost petrified, scared out of my mind of what would happen if I dare move. I finally mustered the strength to remove my glasses and wipe them on my shirt, and redonning them, I could see the shape was still there. The dread grew in intensity tenfold every few seconds, and my naturally calm, rational mind took hold again. I began counting down in my head. What happened next, you may be asking? Well, although the witness did not stick around long for this particular encounter, he did manage to make his way back to the same area in later days, and discovered an anomalous hole in the ground, shaped like an L, surrounded by large, inexplicable scratches, where it would become incredibly windy whenever he drew near. He says this of the strange detail: "The hole is at the bottom of a ravine filled with large, old-growth trees. It suddenly got terribly windy when I was there. If stormy days are anything to compare, I would say winds were reaching 30 to 40 miles per hour at the bottom of a ravine filled with wind-blocked trees. Temperature felt like it dropped about 20 degrees as well. I've been back since, but not often. Each time I visit, I say aloud that whatever is there does not have my permission to come with me back to the house, and most assuredly, nowhere else I go. From Linda Godfrey's book, Monsters Among Us, we also have the story of what appears to have been an invisible Bigfoot, which was frequently seen by a farmer who said this: "The funny thing is that it never left footprints, even in mud, and when it ran through tall weeds, you couldn't hear anything, and sometimes when you looked at it, it looked like you could see through it, like it was a ghost or something." Next, we have a series of reports given to Cryptozoology News involving humanoid entities described as being able to cloak themselves, again, like the predator. The first report comes from a woman who says that her and her husband moved to a new home in the area in western Pennsylvania in 2000. After getting to know the area, one evening they went out with a spotlight to view deer in the wilderness, the only light that which they cast out from their spotlight. As the light stabbed out into the night, the beam captured something within it, although it was not the deer they were expecting to find. The witness describes what they saw. "As I stared at this shape, I realized that I did not know what I was looking at. I knew it wasn't a deer. It wasn't any animal at all. As my brain tried to comprehend what I was looking at, it became more clear the longer I stared. What I saw had the shape of a man, but it was not a man. It was not see-through as a ghost. The only way I can describe it was that it was like standing water, but it didn't cast a shadow. It didn't have any glare to it, as the light was on it. It did not reflect the light. It was not gas, as gas does not have a significant shape. Gas will ebb and flow with the breeze, or at least have an inconsistent shape. Rather, what I saw had a defined shape. That was the only way I could see it, because it had a shape of a human, and I could make that out because of the defined edges and curves. Only because of its outline was I able to make out what I was looking at. When I realized that I was looking at a human shape, I noticed the posture was similar to a person, skulking or sneaking. It was hunched over a little, and one of its arms were frozen in place in front of it, as though it knew we saw it, and it froze in position to try to be undetectable. For moments that must have seemed like an eternity for the frightened woman, the thing remained motionless, as if it were studying them, before creeping off down a knoll, and then it just sort of vanished into thin air. She did not know if the creature had been seen by her husband, and the entire odd encounter had lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to send the woman into a state of panic. She warily told her husband about what she had seen, thinking he might make fun of her, but was shocked when he breathlessly told her that he had witnessed the exact same thing. The witness says, "He saw that it was the shape of a man. He saw that it was hunched over, as if caught red-handed. He saw that it was cloaked like the predator, but it didn't have a jagged camouflaged look. The thing we saw had a smooth look. It was like standing water without the reflection aspect, and its outside shape was smooth and definitive. I do not know what we saw, but I do know it was real. I have been really guarded about this experience and have only told a few people, because I know how skeptics are. I am one of them, yet I cannot refute what we saw. It was real. Nevertheless, whatever it was or is, we saw it. There is no doubt in my mind, or in my husband's. Yes, it was dark, but the spotlight was exceptional with its quality, and there was no mistaking what we saw being confused with any shadows, strange light reflections, optical illusions, gas leaks, ghosts, or any other possible phenomenon. The cloaking capabilities were of absolute exceptional clarity. It bent the light in such a way that it looked like the surrounding environment without any flaws, save for the outline of the man or humanoid being. Aside from the distinctive outline, we would not have been able to detect that anything was there at all. Now, if light reflects the cloak in the daylight, then more people will have more sightings. However, I have a sneaking suspicion that our spotlight deflected the cloaking mechanism in such a way that we were able to detect the outline because of it. In this next account, a man from Washington, 47-year-old Gerald Fair, came forward to say that he has on many occasions spotted invisible humanoids lurking about on his property. They can only be faintly seen if a spotlight is shown on them, or if the angle is just right. He says this regarding his sighting. "They are in my backyard sometimes. I watch them for hours. I think they know I'm watching them, and they mess with me later at night. They have a human shape. At first I thought they were people in camouflage. It is really predator-looking military style. It's been 3 months now. One day I counted over 30 of them. Another report is that of some sort of seemingly alien entity with the ability to become completely invisible at a moment's notice. The strange account comes to us from the small city of Luumäki in the country of Finland, where there lived a family named the Kuningas. One day in 1965, the mother and father were out with their 2 daughters, picking blueberries in the middle of a clear day. At some point, they became aware of an odd bubbling sound coming from the canopy above them, and the father looked to see a man-like form looming up there. The creature began to approach the group. That is, until it just suddenly vanished into thin air right before their eyes, although they could still sense that it was physically there. In another bizarre case from MUFON, a 10-year-old witness and his friends were outside playing with what are described as airsoft guns along a river in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, in the summer of 2001. It was sort of like a paintball game, a battle, with both of the boys trying to track each other down and shoot each other, and so the witness found himself hunkered down in some brush, waiting to ambush the friend. Listening intently to his surroundings, he then heard the crackling of twigs and leaves, and assumed this to be his quarry. Yet when he looked, he only noticed some branches waving about, as if someone was going through them. It was odd, since the day had been calm and windless, so the boy could not figure out how the grass and branches could be moving about like that, when no one really seemed to be there. The curious witness then moved closer to the strange anomaly, and was surprised to see that branches were snapped and bending, as if brushing up against a solid object, but still he could see nothing there to explain it. He blinked his eyes, and intently peered at the spot, and suddenly he could see the vague outline of something, described as standing 8 feet tall, and with an oval head, the whole of it completely translucent and only visible through a certain angle of light, almost as if it were a faint hologram. The terrified boy then allegedly shouted out in surprise, and the entity crouched down into an attack stance and stared at him for a few moments, issuing some otherworldly sounds before making a dash for the wooded tree line, crushing brush and bushes as it went. The witness would claim that he would hear those bizarre guttural noises in the surrounding forest near his house on occasion after that, and that a few years later he witnessed a black triangle-shaped UFO with 3 orange-red lights flying over his house and then shoot into the sky at breathtaking speed. Another report comes from 2 boys by the names of Denilson and Raphael, who in 2008 were out playing in the Sebastian's Chapel Square of Brazil, when they spotted some bright rotating red and blue lights move over the square towards a nearby field, where they seemed to descend. Gathering some others, the boys warily approached the field, where the anomalous lights could be seen hovering in the air, but even stranger than this were what appeared to be several transparent entities crouched in the field beneath. The report comes from Milton Dino Frank Jr., and he explains the unearthly creatures. The creatures were crouching in a horseshoe or U formation, and appeared to be communicating with each other. The boys were extremely frightened, since they had never seen anything like that before. The boys were convinced that the creatures were not animals, since the behavior was totally different from that of typical farm animals that abounded in the area. The boys explained that the creatures were well defined, but when they changed their viewing angle, they were able to see 4 and up to 5 creatures, giving some of the creatures the appearance of being invisible, and only becoming visible when struck by the light rain that was falling at the time. When Cristiano shone his scooter headlight directly on the creatures, they disappeared. They could only see the creatures when it was dark. In the darkness, they could still see the contours of their body. The boys estimated the creatures to have been about 1.2 meters in height, with large black oval-shaped eyes, lacking noses or ears. They had a round mouth, and their color was dark gray. They had hands with fingers, but were unable to count how many on each hand. All 4 of the youths gave identical descriptions of the creatures. The boys would claim to have watched these bizarre invisible entities for a full 40 minutes, after which a red laser point appeared on one of the boys' shirts, and they could see it was a red beam of light coming from a cylindrical object out in the field, which also happened to have smoke wafting off of it. The terrified boys then perhaps wisely hastily got out of the area, only to come back a few days later to find that all of the bushes and brush in the vicinity of the sighting had turned brown. On the forum called Hernando's Hideaway comes an incredible account from a commenter claiming to see what he described as a cloaked Bigfoot. The witness says that he has always been an outdoorsman and would often go hiking in the woods around rural areas where he lived, often going to relax at a secluded log in the forest. The witness describes having gone out to that log numerous times and never having felt anything but peace and quiet. But on this day, something would be different. The witness describes the experience he would have. This particular day, I sat on the log. I heard some rustling in the bushes. I felt an uneasiness come over me, as if I was being watched. I could sense the direction it was coming from, too, so I stood up and walked slowly to get a better view, when I noticed a very large creature that I could see standing between two trees. I would say it was at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. The body of this creature had a wavy pattern flowing through it, like heat waves that come up from a hot road surface. I could see the forest behind it, through it. The wavy pattern is how I was able to make out its form. There wasn't anything causing a heat wave anywhere else. It just stood there, looking at me. I froze for a minute in pure fear that encompassed my entire being, but out of pure fight or flight adrenaline, I finally made my legs move, and I walked a safe distance. Then I ran. I was afraid if I started out running, it would chase me, like the way they say animals will do. I made it safely back home, and I don't remember ever going back to those woods alone after that. I missed going to my spot. It was my place to find peace and talk with nature. That thing stole it from me. Since that encounter, I've often wondered if this is how Bigfoot is so good at avoiding being captured. The last report I'd like to share with you comes from Reddit, from a user called Queen of the Sea, which seems to have happened not out in some rugged wilderness, but right out in the middle of a busy street. She says that she was 15 years old at the time, and being driven to school up a fairly busy road, when she saw what looked like the silhouette of a man just walking along. She then says this: "It looked like the silhouette of a man, but as if he was invisible, and as if I could only see him because he was reflecting light and color around him. It's so strange to describe. It was as if he was made of glass or mirrors, but barely distinguishable from his surroundings, as if he was invisible, but not quite. I remember pushing my mom to force her into turning the car because I was afraid of hitting him. She had gotten back control really quickly, and we only swerved a little bit. She had lectured me about it on the way to school. I don't know why I'm thinking about it today. I looked it up online trying to describe what I saw as best I could, but I couldn't find anything relevant." There are many other odd accounts involving these strange entities, including a very interesting account at the end of David Paulides' Missing 411 The Hunted documentary. Several cases can also be heard over on Kyle and Cam's podcast, Expanded Perspectives, where they refer to this entity as the Glimmerman. I thoroughly enjoyed their show, and I think you will too. And of course, we'll continue to share more encounters as they come in. So what are these bizarre cloaked or camouflaged beings? Are they spirits of some sort that simply appear in different forms? Maybe they're aliens with some sort of advanced technology. Or perhaps there's something even more sinister. Whatever they are, it may be proof that we truthfully don't understand the reality in which we live, and listening to our gut instincts when they tell us that something isn't quite right may be even more important than we realize. Because for all we know, the scariest things in this world may be the things that we cannot see. If you or someone that you know has witnessed something unexplainable and you'd like to have your story shared on the podcast, please contact me at paranormalmysteriespodcast@gmail.com or visit paranormalmysteriespodcast.com and click on the Tell Your Story link. Please remember, no matter how insignificant or outlandish you believe your experience may seem, I'd like to hear about it. You can also connect with us by joining our forum and by following us on social media. All of our contact information, as well as the sources referenced in today's episode, can be found in the show notes. If you'd like to support the podcast, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your friends. If you're interested in taking the next step and becoming a patron, you can visit patreon.com/paranormal mysteries. Benefits include ad-free episodes and early access to select shows. From all of us at the Paranormal Mysteries Podcast, thank you for listening, and please remember, don't wait for the unknown to come to you. Get out there and find it.